I'm Director of Sales and Business Development here at Rentsync. I've been with Rentsync for about 6 years, been in the industry for over 8. Previously, I was one of you guys. I worked in leasing and marketing and advertising. So I have a pretty full, comprehensive view of kind of the challenges and the pain points that you guys encounter on a daily basis. And I advise, my clients on their marketing strategy and how to get the most out of, what they're investing in. Throughout my, discussions with clients, there are kind of some consistent themes that come up, some kind of FAQs that come up. So I want to try and cover those today. And there's kind of 3 main themes that I get asked about, one being, where do I advertise? What should I be doing? The other one being, how do I maximize what I'm doing? Max mentioned earlier today that the Vancouver market is definitely seeing more competition than we've seen in previous years. And that puts tremendous pressure on marketers to, show results, show more leads, show consistent leads. It also puts pressure on providers of advertising and leads, to kind of, show more leads and kind of explain market factors that might be contributing to your performance. And then I wanted to, contextualize how you're, how you're able to put it all together and, what it all means. We'd like to break it down into 3 major components here. 1 being rental listing sites, 2 being Google ads, and 3 being social media advertising. So rental listing sites, you know them. Hopefully you love them. Otherwise, you're probably at the wrong user conference. Advertising on Canada's network of top listing sites is a super important place to be. It's where renters start their search. So leveraging them in a really strong way is a super important part of any diversified advertising strategy. It's typically going to be your number 1 lead driver in terms of volume. So, you guys definitely are using these for the most part and can see the results. Second is going to be Google search and display ads. So the ability to get really targeted campaigns built that are going to serve renters with a very relevant ad based on exactly their search criteria, and it'll direct them right to a property website or your own corporate website. That's pretty synonymous with a high quality lead, provided that you're able to get them there, because you're bringing them to your website, which is going to be like your number 1 sales tool, your number 1 leasing tool. So Google Ads, super important complement to your rental listing site advertising. And number 3, social media marketing. This is pretty useful as well in the fact that it can bring new prospects to your, we all work in the real estate industry. Every time you open Instagram, you probably see a social media advertisement for a new development, because it knows what our search history is and it thinks that we're going to be looking to move. So the quality kind of varies a little bit, but it's very good at attracting new potential prospects to your sites. So now I want to talk about the actual competition landscape of your strategy. So one of the most frequent questions I get asked is, how do I get to be number 1 on Google? Why am I not number 1 on Google? That's a tricky question to answer. And it's many times it's people's bosses are asking that. And then they want to, know how they get to the top. It's a real challenge, due to a number of factors. So if you type in apartments for rent in any, major city in Canada, the first result is going to be an ILS. So that's based on a couple factors. Number 1 is volume. So, you search for apartments for rent in Vancouver. Rentals.ca would have thousands of apartments for rent in Vancouver. Google's going to be like, okay, if someone's looking for an apartment for rent, this one has 1,000 of them, probably a good place to start, and it's going to recommend it. Authority is going to be another one. So how long have you been around? Do you have a long track record of being able to, do what you say you do? If you say you have apartments for rent, but it's you're advertising something that's not relevant to that, you're going to rank lower. Performance, is your site mobile friendly? Is it easy to use? When people go onto the site, do they navigate it effectively? We're a tech company at the end of the day, so we're invested in the performance of our site being, top notch. And then traffic. Traffic's a huge factor. The rental listing sites have millions of visits and sessions per month. The best property website, for like the best type of property website wouldn't be able to come close to that, in a given month. Organic search are about 8.5 times more likely to get clicked on than paid searches. which kind of underscores the value of that real estate. Like if you're able to be number one or number two or number three in the organic rankings, it's a very favorable position to be in. So the way to kind of, get around that is via ads. So if you want to have, priority placement on Google, being in those ad spots is the way to do it, because, getting there organically is not necessarily feasible. So when you look to use ads to get into the ad spots, you can definitely do that. There's cost implications though. ILSs and you have common customers. We're fishing in the same pond. You're trying to get rental prospects to your websites. We're trying to get rental prospects to our sites. Josh did a great job of discussing apartments.com and their entrance into the market. They're a very large company. They have lots of resources. Once again, even for them, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to knock off the dominant placements on the organic side. So how they're trying to, get their market share and get their traffic is via Google Ads. As Google Ad providers and Google Ads users, we're definitely noticing that, the price of clicks is going up. These keywords are becoming very, very competitive. And it's definitely resulting in a higher cost per click, and ultimately kind of less ROI. So a way kind of to augment that is strategic positioning. So you can focus on long tail keywords or alternate strategies, that complement rather than compete with the ILS. So instead of apartments for rent, which is a very high volume term, you can do, pet friendly apartments for rent in a specific neighborhood. You can you'll get less volume. You'll get probably less volume, but it'll be a very, high quality lead if someone does have that kind of matching search term. The unfortunate point of that is that we, as listing site, the rental listing sites are also using those terms as well. So it is a challenging landscape, but it definitely still will provide results. So how to leverage the ILSs most effectively? So as I mentioned before, this is where rental searches begin. So someone puts their keywords into a search engine, and then, as we can agree, they'll typically end up at an ILS when they go to see the results. So they'll end up on a rentals.ca, a Zumper, and that's where they actually refine their search. So you start at your ILS. There's the most selection there. You shop around. You gauge the market. I guess, what is realistic for you to be able to afford, what maybe is not realistic for you to afford. And then you can really refine and hone in on your search. You go to the rental listings. You then, you can go to a link directly in that rental listing to your website. And then that can lead to conversions and tours. I want to kind of touch on what Josh mentioned a little bit about classified ads and other kind of other search sites that are in the market there. So just because something is highly trafficked does not necessarily mean that it equals high quality results. You still need to be strategic and selective with your ILS choices. So classified sites, they drive tons of traffic, but very little of it is qualified. It can be people that are looking for something that's not necessarily an apartment. I put location here because, some of these classified sites will just have a list that doesn't even take into account location or geography. So you're getting essentially results that are far less relevant based on what you're looking for. And that's always going to lead to a lower quality lead. And then I put brand association here as another factor to consider here. With the shift to really high quality purpose-built rentals that are kind of playing in the luxury space, there is kind of a desire to kind of move away from having your brand associated with, a site that's also selling, used mattresses and, other things that are not necessarily in line with the brand that you've built. It's kind of like why you wouldn't be able to buy a Rolex from Dollarama or, Lululemon at Walmart. Just because these stores or these sites are highly trafficked does not necessarily mean that there is it's the right fit for your type of product. It's also kind of a challenge when you talk about Facebook Marketplace or using, that type of listing site, because, I'm sure you guys have all sold something on Facebook Marketplace or have some experience with it. The first response you get typically is, say you're asking for something for $100. Someone says, I'll give you 80, right? So if you're putting your apartment or your availabilities, on a site like that, the rent is $1,600. Someone's like, oh, I'll give you $1,250. We're not in the negotiating business necessarily. I hope not here, right? The rent's the rent, and it takes a lot of your time. It's definitely like a lower quality overall interaction, and that's some of the kind of reasons why. You've got your strategy. You're kind of analyzing the various components of it, but you want to be constantly kind of monitoring it and thinking about it maybe one level deeper. So if you'll indulge me here, I want to kind of just go through a little story here or set the tone here on the whole concept of diminishing returns in advertising. So sign spinner here, you've seen them outside of car washes or pizza places. This guy's doing a great job. So we decide to hire a sign spinner for our business. He costs $150 a day. And, first day out there, he makes $1,000 in revenue. Profit of $850. Wow, fantastic. Great return on investment there. Let's try that again. Let's get 2 sign spinners. So it doubles our investment. It's $300. He brings in $1,600. They bring in $1,600 worth of revenue. The profit's $1,300. So it's not linear. Just because you doubled your investment, that does not double your return. But still a great return. You've made an extra $550 in profit just by adding that second guy. So let's add a third guy into the mix. So our total investment is $450. Our revenue is $2,000. Our profit goes up still incrementally to $1,550. So you can see that it's starting to kind of plateau and flatten out. But you still made an extra $250 than you would have otherwise. So can't argue that that's a bad investment. So you're like, I like where this is doing for us. We're going to cut off other forms of advertising. We are a sign spinning company. This is how we advertise our availabilities. So you add a fourth guy. You're up to $600 in your investment. This revenue only goes up another $100 in that case. Your profit actually shrinks even though your revenue went up. So you're now, only having a profit of $1,500. So it's not necessarily working. You kind of exhausted that channel. So you want to be able to identify when you're seeing those plateaus, and act accordingly. So you see the point of maximum yield. That's our 3 sign guy. That's the 3 sign strategy. And we want to get to that point. We always want to tinker and optimize where possible to get to that point, but we don't want to fall off that cliff where you get to the point of actual negative returns. So with, every dollar spent, advertising yields progressively smaller benefits, depending on kind of the channel that you're using. But there are some scenarios in which, approaching that point of diminishing returns is an acceptable outcome. There are some strategic considerations in which that is an okay result. Number one being, if you're what are you ultimately measuring? Are you measuring a cost per lead? Are you measuring leases signed? Are you measuring cost per lead? So having well-defined KPIs is really important. So just because your cost per lead goes up, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're getting more leases. I see sometimes a lot of my clients do tend to fixate on cost per lead, and the end result, is the answer to your cost per lease going down? Is it to get fewer leads? Is it to get fewer leases signed? I don't think so. So you want to kind of get that sweet spot where you're balancing it, and it makes sense to do so. It's also really important for brand reinforcement. Ali mentioned the importance of developing your brand. So you've got this lovely logo, you've got all this great content, you're building a registration page, you're trying to drive traffic to the website. But just because you've got this, this lovely logo developed doesn't mean that people are going to start breaking down your door, trying to sign leases because, they love the bird logo you developed, right? So it's but long term, that's going to pay off because there's going to be that brand recognition, you're getting registrants, and it's ultimately going to be a worthwhile investment. It's also, when there's an opportunity cost involved. So say you're on rentals.ca, you've got a promoted listing that's, near the top of the list. And, you want to get a little bit higher. So you invest more into a higher tier promoted listing. You get a bit higher, but the increase in leads maybe isn't proportionate to the increase in cost. So you're like, I want to go down back to what I had before. The cost per lead goes a little bit lower than where you wanted it to be, but someone else jumped into your spot. So they're getting that change in leads that you got, even if it wasn't a linear 1-for-1 replacement. And that's a lead that's not going to you. That's an impression that's not going to you. So it's important to kind of always consider, what's most important, when you're weighing your different components of your advertising campaign. I would also say, like, with Google ads, there's no cap on the budget. You can say, hey, I want $1 million a month on apartments for rent in Vancouver that are pet friendly, that have an east facing view. And you'll be able to do that, but it's not going to be able to, the return isn't, if you're going to be using something way too powerful for what you need to be doing there. With ILSs, there is an upper limit to what you spend. You kind of have the highest tier possible. And you won't be spending more to that. So use prognostication tools to see kind of what every dollar you spend more, what is that going to potentially lead to an increase in terms of, expected performance. Definitely scenarios in which they are not acceptable. So if it's a very niche, audience that you're looking for, if there's a really, I guess, pricey rents, that only attract a very small, market subset, you don't want to be over-investing and showing the same ads to the same amount of people over and over again, when you've exhausted and saturated that market. Targeting a small specific audience can lead to exhaustion, and additional spending no longer generates returns. You can hit that point pretty quickly, and you don't want to use that if that's the scenario that you're in. So it's really important to monitor what you're doing in terms of your advertising. This, I'd say, would be an ideal curve that you'd be looking to replicate here. You want everything going up and to the right always. You don't want to hit too many plateaus, but you want to identify those investment plateaus. If you've hit one of those, you want to reduce spending on channels that show the signs of diminishing returns, provided the context is there. You want to continue to diversify. You want to always, try and hit these peak levels, and then avoid negative returns where possible. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of just wrap up, by saying, like, it's important to have, a well-balanced strategy here. And, I work with a number of different companies across Canada, in kind of refining and maximizing and honing in this strategy. And I'm happy to kind of chat with anybody else that would like to, learn more about this sort of thing. Thanks so much.
Okay, so Matt, you mentioned that promoted listings have an upper limit on ILSs. Can you maybe elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah. So I would say that there are, like, Josh mentioned that, like, we've kind of taken a consolidated approach with our rental listing site network. It was a bit fragmented before. Previously, there was probably like 16 different promoted listing options that you can choose. We've distilled that into 4 different packages that have different components of these different promoted listings that complement one another. And it's kind of designed in a way that, we know the Canadian market really well, and there's a bucket for each type of property that a certain property can fit into. So you want to be strategic and selective with what type of promoted listing packages you use. If a certain tier, for simplicity's sake, we call them the Infinity 2X upgrade, 4X, 6X, and Max. If there's a certain city or a type of property that you're considering using promoted listings for, and you use the 2X upgrade, there might not be a reasonable scenario to use something more than that if that already gets you to the top or in that kind of optimal placement. So the Canadian market has some regional differences in terms of advertising site performance. So we have, a package that is ideal for Vancouver properties. Let's say that's the 6X or the Max package for lease ups in Vancouver. So I wouldn't recommend that to, someone in Squamish where a 2X might do the trick.
Squamish catching some heat today, but one last question before we all break for lunch.
Yeah.
How do I get to number 1 on Google rank? They're not looking for 2. This right to 1, and I hope you have the answer for this one. But
yeah, so more often than not, when I hear that, it's someone's boss saying, "Why aren't we on number 1 on Google?" So now you guys know why that maybe isn't a realistic expectation. You can give them my number if they want to chat.
Yeah, it's not like where you rank, it's already being seen in front of the right person at the right time, right? Like, you don't want to have the impression go to somebody who works for a company and like, oh, you're seeing your ads. Well, you shouldn't be seeing your ads. You work at that company. You work for this building. So that's a wasted impression, right? So it's a little bit more tailored than that. But Yeah, I think that wraps it up, everyone. Big round of applause for Matt Livingstone.